Hannah Armstrong's empty stomach twisted into knots so tight she could barely stand upright as she watched the baker through the dusty window of his shop in Westcliff, Colorado. Knowing that the golden loaves inside might as well have been made of pure gold for all her chances of affording one. The year was 1882, and 3 weeks had passed since her father's mining accident had left her orphaned at 19 years old. 3 weeks since she had eaten anything more substantial than wild berries and creek water. 3 weeks since she had realized that the world cared nothing for a young woman with no family and no prospects in a rough mining town, perched high in the wet mountain valley. She reached into her worn coat pocket and felt the smooth silver surface of her mother's locket, the last thing she owned in this world besides the threadbare clothes on her back. Her fingers traced the delicate engravings she had memorized years ago, the tiny clasp that still worked perfectly after all these years. Inside were 2 miniature portraits, one of her mother with her kind eyes and gentle smile, one of her father before the mines had worn him down to nothing. Hannah had sworn to herself 100 times that she would never part with it, that she would starve first, that she would rather die than let go of the only tangible connection to her parents that remained. But hunger had a way of making liars of even the most sincere promises. The bakery door creaked as she pushed it open, and the smell of fresh bread nearly knocked her off her feet. Her mouth watered so intensely it hurt, and she had to grip the edge of the wooden counter to steady herself. The baker, a portly man named Mr. Hutchinson with flour permanently dusted across his apron, looked up from his work and frowned at the sight of her. "No charity here, girl," he said before she could speak. "I've told you twice already this week." Hannah straightened her spine, trying to summon whatever dignity she had left. "I am not asking for charity, sir. I have something to trade." She pulled the locket from her pocket and laid it on the counter between them. The silver caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, and for a moment it looked as beautiful as it had when her mother first wore it. Mr. Hutchinson picked it up, examined it with the practiced eye of someone who had accepted trades before, and nodded slowly. "I can give you 2 loaves for this," he said. "It is decent silver. 2 loaves. Enough food to last her perhaps a week if she was careful, if she rationed it properly, if she did not think too hard about what would happen when those loaves were gone." She opened her mouth to accept, but the words stuck in her throat. This locket was all she had left, the only proof that she had once belonged to someone, that she had once been part of a family that loved her. 3 loaves, she heard herself say. "It is worth at least 3. Mr. Hutchinson shrugged. 2 loaves or nothing, girl. Take it or leave it." Hannah felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry, not here, not in front of this man who looked at her like she was nothing more than a nuisance. "I will take it." The baker nodded and went to wrap up 2 loaves in brown paper. Hannah watched him, feeling something inside her chest crack and splinter like ice on a frozen pond. When he slid the package across the counter and pocketed her locket without ceremony, she grabbed the bread and turned to leave before the tears could betray her. She nearly collided with a man standing just inside the doorway. "Pardon me," she mumbled, trying to step around him, but he moved at the same time, blocking her path accidentally. She looked up, ready to apologize again, and found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that needed cutting and trail dust covering his worn leather vest and chaps. He had the sun-weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors, and there was something in his expression that made Hannah pause. He was watching her with an intensity that should have been unsettling but somehow was not. "Excuse me," she said again, and this time he stepped aside properly, but his eyes never left her face. Hannah pushed past him and out into the street, clutching her brown paper package like a lifeline. The late afternoon sun was beginning to sink behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that she might have found beautiful if her heart was not breaking. She found a quiet spot behind the general store where no one would bother her and sat down in the dust, carefully unwrapping one of the loaves. The bread was still warm, soft and perfect, and the first bite was the most delicious thing she had tasted in weeks. She forced herself to eat slowly, to make it last, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour the entire loaf in minutes. As she ate, she touched the empty pocket where her locket had been, and finally allowed herself to cry. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her, and she looked up to find the blue-eyed man from the bakery standing there. In his hand, her mother's locket dangled from its silver chain, catching the dying light. "This belongs to you," he said, his voice rough and low like gravel underfoot. Hannah scrambled to her feet, nearly dropping her bread. "What? How did you—" "I bought it from Hutchinson," the man said simply. He held it out to her. "Take it." She stared at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. "I do not understand. Why would you do that? Because you should not have had to trade it in the first place." He took a step closer, pressing the locket into her palm and closing her fingers around it. "Keep it. Keep your bread, too. Keep it all." Hannah felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but this time they were different, confused and overwhelmed. "I cannot accept this. I have no way to repay you. I have nothing. Did I ask for repayment?" The man's expression softened slightly, something almost like a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "My name is Thomas Vaughn. My friends call me Tom." "Hannah Armstrong," she whispered, still clutching the locket like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. "Why are you doing this? You do not even know me." Tom looked at her for a long moment, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "I watched you in there. I saw what it cost you to trade that locket. Nobody should have to give up the last piece of their family just to eat." He paused, then added, "I lost my own parents 5 years back. I know what it is like." The simple honesty in his words broke through the last of Hannah's defenses. She stood there in the dusty alley behind a general store in Westcliff, Colorado, holding her mother's locket and a loaf of bread, crying in front of a complete stranger who had just shown her more kindness than anyone had in weeks. "Thank you," she managed to say between tears. "You do not know what this means to me." Tom shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "When did you last have a proper meal? And I do not mean just bread." Hannah wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I have been managing. That is not what I asked." His tone was gentle but firm. "Come on. The restaurant down the street serves decent beef stew. Let me buy you dinner." "I could not possibly." "You can and you will," Tom interrupted. "Please, let me do this." There was something in his expression that made Hannah realize refusing would somehow hurt him, that his offer came from a genuine place of wanting to help rather than any expectation of something in return. She nodded slowly, still overwhelmed, and allowed him to guide her back toward the main street. The restaurant was nothing fancy, just a simple establishment with wooden tables and chairs and the smell of cooking meat filling the air. Tom led her to a table in the back and ordered 2 bowls of stew, biscuits, coffee, and apple pie for dessert. When the food arrived, Hannah had to force herself to eat slowly again, to remember her manners, even though every cell in her body screamed at her to shovel the food into her mouth as fast as possible. Tom ate his own meal quietly, not pressuring her to talk, not asking invasive questions, just letting her eat in peace. It was only after she had finished most of her stew that he finally spoke. "What happened to your father?" he asked, "if you do not mind my asking." Hannah set down her spoon, surprised to find she wanted to tell him. Mining accident 3 weeks ago. A cave-in at the Silver Cliff mine. He was killed instantly, along with 2 other men. She stared into her coffee cup. We had nothing saved. He spent everything he earned just keeping us fed and housed. After he died, the landlord gave me 1 week before he rented our room to someone else. I have been sleeping in the old barn at the edge of town since then. Tom's jaw tightened. You have been homeless for 2 weeks. Closer to 3 now, Hannah admitted. But the barn is dry and nobody bothers me there. I have had worse. And no other family, nobody who could take you in, she shook her head. My mother died when I was 12. It was always just me and my father after that. He had a brother somewhere in Kansas, but they had not spoken in over 20 years. I would not even know how to find him. Tom was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he said, I have a proposition for you if you are willing to hear it. Hannah looked up sharply, immediately wary. She had heard about propositions before, knew what some men expected from desperate women with nowhere else to turn. But when she met Tom's eyes, she saw nothing predatory there, only earnest concern. What kind of proposition? She asked carefully. I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here, Tom explained. Nothing huge, just a small operation with about 200 head. I have 3 ranch hands who help with the work, and an older woman named Mrs. Chen who does the cooking and housekeeping. She has been telling me for months that she needs help, that the work is getting to be too much for her alone. He paused, meeting her gaze directly. I could use another hand at the ranch, room and board plus wages. Nothing improper, separate quarters for the women and Mrs. Chen would be right there as a chaperone. You would be safe, I give you my word. Hannah felt her heart hammering in her chest. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why would you offer me this? You do not know anything about me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse. Tom smiled, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. Call it instinct. I am a pretty good judge of character, and you strike me as someone who has had some bad luck but is not looking for handouts. Am I wrong? No, Hannah admitted. I want to work. I want to earn my keep. I just have not been able to find anyone willing to hire me. Well, I am willing, Tom said. If you are interested, I will take you out to the ranch tomorrow morning. You can meet Mrs. Chen and see the place, and if it suits you, the job is yours. Hannah wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab onto this lifeline with both hands and never let go. But years of having to be careful to protect herself made her hesitate. Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you help me today? The truth. Tom leaned back in his chair, considering his answer carefully. Honestly, I saw you through that bakery window before you even went inside. I saw the look on your face, like you were preparing yourself for battle. Then I watched you trade that locket and I saw it break you, even though you tried to hide it. I saw my sister in you. Your sister, Sarah. She died 7 years ago, fever. She was about your age when it happened. Tom's voice was rough with old grief. She had this little wooden horse that our father carved for her when she was small. She carried it everywhere, even when she got too old for toys. After she died, my mother wanted to bury it with her, but I could not stand the thought of Sarah going into the ground with the thing she loved most. It felt wrong somehow, so we kept it. He pulled something from his vest pocket and showed it to Hannah. It was a small, intricately carved wooden horse, worn smooth from years of handling. I carry it with me everywhere. And when I saw you trade your locket, I just kept thinking about how I would feel if I had to give this up just to eat. I could not let that happen to you. Hannah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the hot food in her stomach. This man, this stranger, had seen her pain and responded with kindness instead of taking advantage. It was so rare, so unexpected that she almost did not know how to process it. "I would like to see your ranch," she said softly, "and meet Mrs. Chen. If she thinks I can do the work, then I accept your offer." Tom's smile returned, bright and genuine. "Good, that is settled then. For tonight, let me get you a room at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable place, and she will not ask questions if I tell her you are to be working at my ranch." "I cannot ask you to spend more money on me," Hannah protested, but Tom was already standing. "You did not ask, I offered. There is a difference." He left coins on the table to cover their meal and held out his hand to help her up. "Come on. Let me take care of this last thing, and then tomorrow we start fresh." Hannah took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, and let him lead her back out into the now dark streets of Westcliff. The boarding house was only a few buildings away, a neat two-story structure with lace curtains in the windows and flower boxes that probably looked lovely in spring. Mrs. Patterson was a plump woman with kind eyes who took one look at Hannah's bedraggled appearance and immediately softened. Tom spoke to her quietly, and whatever he said made the woman nod and gesture for Hannah to follow her upstairs. The room was small but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts and a washstand with fresh water. After Mrs. Patterson left, Hannah stood in the middle of the room, hardly believing this was real. Just this morning she had woken in a drafty barn, hungry and hopeless, and now she had a full stomach, her mother's locket safely around her neck, and the promise of a job tomorrow. She carefully rewrapped the remaining loaves of bread and set them on the small table by the window. Then she washed her face and hands in the basin, marveling at the luxury of clean water and soap. When she finally lay down on the bed, it felt like sinking into clouds after weeks of sleeping on scratchy hay. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Thomas Vaughn and his impossibly blue eyes, and the way he had looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth saving. Morning came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Hannah woke before dawn, her body still accustomed to the early light that filtered through the barn walls, and lay in the comfortable bed trying to convince herself that yesterday had really happened. When she finally rose and dressed in her worn clothes, she was grateful that at least they were relatively clean, washed in the creek just 2 days before. Tom was waiting for her downstairs when she came down, looking like he had already been up for hours. He had a wagon hitched outside with 2 sturdy horses, and he helped her up onto the seat before climbing up beside her. Mrs. Patterson sent them off with a basket of biscuits and bacon wrapped in cloth, refusing to let Hannah leave without breakfast. The ride out of Westcliff took them north along a well-worn trail that climbed gradually into the foothills. The morning air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and sage, and the mountains rose up around them like ancient sentinels. Hannah had lived in Westcliff for 3 years, but she had never ventured much beyond the town limits, her life confined to the small radius between her father's mine, their rented room, and the handful of shops where they purchased supplies. "It is beautiful out here," she said, watching an eagle circle overhead. Tom nodded, his eyes scanning the landscape with the practiced ease of someone who knew every rock and tree. "This valley has been my home since I was 20. Saved up for 4 years working trail drives before I had enough to buy the land and start building. It is not much, but it is mine." "How long have you been ranching?" "5 years now. Started with just 50 head of cattle and built it up slowly. Some years are better than others, but I make enough to keep the ranch going and pay my hands fairly. That is all I need." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Hannah found herself studying Tom when she thought he was not looking. In the morning light, she could see details she had missed last night. The laugh lines around his eyes despite his young age, the small scar on his chin, the way his hands held the reins with confident ease. He was handsome, she realized, though not in the polished way of city men. His was a rugged, weathered attractiveness, the kind that came from honest work and hard living. "Tell me about the ranch hands," Hannah said, suddenly nervous about meeting so many new people at once. "What are they like?" Tom seemed to consider this. "Well, there is Miguel, who has been with me from the beginning. He is maybe 45, married with grown children who live in Trinidad. Good with horses, better with rope. Then there is Danny, who is only 18 but works harder than men twice his age. He came to me last year looking for work after his family's farm failed. And finally, Jack, who is in his 50s and has forgotten more about cattle than I will ever know. He worked the big ranches in Texas before he got tired of the corporate outfits and wanted something smaller. They sound like good men. They are. I have been lucky." Tom glanced at her. "And Mrs. Chen is the heart of the whole operation. She is Chinese, came over with her husband during the railroad construction. He died about 10 years ago, and she has been working as a cook and housekeeper ever since. She is tough as nails but has a good heart. You will like her." "I hope she likes me," Hannah said quietly. Tom's expression softened. "She will. Do not worry." The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, and Hannah caught her breath. It was not grand or fancy, but it was solid and well-maintained, a testament to honest labor. The main house was a 2-story log structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a smaller cabin that Hannah guessed must be Mrs. Chen's quarters, and various other outbuildings for storage and equipment. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the rolling grassland. "Welcome to the Vaughn Ranch," Tom said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. He helped her down from the wagon, and immediately a small, sturdy woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Chen had iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing as she looked Hannah up and down. "So this is the girl you told me about," she said to Tom, her English accented but clear. "Yes, madam. Hannah Armstrong, meet Mrs. Chen." Tom made the introductions formally. Hannah offered a small curtsy, unsure of the proper protocol. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Chen. Tom said you might need help around the ranch." Mrs. Chen circled Hannah slowly, examining her like a horse at auction. Hannah stood still and let her look, understanding that she was being assessed. Finally, the older woman nodded. "You are skinny. We will fix that. Your hands are soft. We will fix that too. But your eyes are honest, and that is what matters most. Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me before she passed. I can make bread, stews, roasts, pies, preserves, whatever you need." "Can you clean without complaining?" "Yes, madam." "Can you take orders and work hard even when you are tired?" "Yes, madam." Mrs. Chen looked at Tom. "I like her. She can stay." Tom laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Well, that is settled then. Hannah, let me show you where you will be staying." He led her to the small cabin next to the main house. Inside was cozy, with 2 small bedrooms separated by a common living area with a fireplace and a tiny kitchen. "You will share this cabin with Mrs. Chen. That is her room there. This one will be yours." He opened the door to reveal a simple room with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It is not much, it is perfect," Hannah interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "Tom, I do not know how to thank you for all of this." "Then do not try. Just do good work and be honest with me, and we will call it even." He stepped back toward the door. "Get yourself settled in. Mrs. Chen will show you the ropes and explain your duties. Dinner is at 6 and everyone eats together in the main house. I will introduce you to the hands then." After he left, Hannah stood alone in her new room, touching the quilt on the bed, the smooth surface of the dresser, the glass of the window. She had not had her own room since her mother died 7 years ago. After that, she and her father had shared whatever small space they could afford, usually just one room divided by a curtain for privacy. This was hers, small but private, clean and safe. She carefully unpacked her 2 loaves of bread and set them on the dresser, then hung her mother's locket on the corner of the mirror where she could see it every morning when she woke. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Chen was an exacting teacher but not unkind, showing Hannah where everything was kept, explaining the daily routine, demonstrating how she liked things done. The main house was Tom's domain, with a large kitchen, a dining area, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and upstairs, bedrooms that Hannah was not shown but assumed belonged to Tom. Her duties would include helping Mrs. Chen with all the cooking and cleaning, tending the vegetable garden behind the cabin, doing laundry, and any other tasks that needed doing around the house. "The ranch hands take care of themselves mostly," Mrs. Chen explained as they prepared dinner together that evening. "They do their own laundry, keep their bunkhouse clean, but we cook for everyone and they eat here. Tom likes it that way. He says it builds family." "That is nice," Hannah said, peeling potatoes. "He seems like a good man." Mrs. Chen gave her a sharp look. "He is the best man I know. Fair, honest, works as hard as any of his hands. But do not go getting ideas, girl. He is the boss and you are the help. Keep that straight in your mind." Hannah felt her cheeks flush. I did not. Of course not, Mrs. Chen said, but there was something almost knowing in her expression. "Just remember what I said. Now, those potatoes need to be in the pot 10 minutes ago. Move faster." By the time 6 o'clock arrived, Hannah was exhausted but satisfied. The dining table in the main house was laden with roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie. Mrs. Chen had done most of the work, but Hannah had helped, and there was pride in seeing the meal come together. The ranch hands arrived in a group, stomping dirt from their boots on the porch before entering. Tom made introductions, and Hannah met Miguel with his weathered face and kind smile, young Danny with his shock of red hair and eager demeanor, and Jack whose gray beard and steady eyes spoke of decades of experience. They all greeted her politely, but without excessive curiosity, accepting her presence as easily as they might accept a new horse in the barn. Dinner was a lively affair, with the men swapping stories about the day's work and teasing each other good-naturedly. Tom sat at the head of the table, and Hannah noticed how his men respected him, how they listened when he spoke, how there was no fear in their interactions, only genuine regard. This was a family of sorts, she realized, bound not by blood but by shared purpose and mutual respect. After the meal, Hannah and Mrs. Chen cleared the dishes while the men retired to the sitting room to smoke and talk. As she washed plates in the kitchen, Hannah could hear the rumble of their voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and she felt something unfamiliar warming in her chest. This was what safety felt like. This was what home felt like. Later, back in her cabin, Hannah lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. One day. Her entire life had changed in one day because a stranger with blue eyes had decided to be kind. She touched the locket at her throat and whispered a prayer of thanks to her parents, wherever they were, for watching over her and leading her to this place. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Hannah woke before dawn each morning and helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for 6 hungry people. After the meal, while the men headed out to work the cattle, she and Mrs. Chen would clean the kitchen, air out the bedrooms, tend the garden, and begin preparations for the midday meal. Afternoons were for laundry, mending, baking, and 100 other small tasks that kept a ranch house running. By the time dinner was served each evening, Hannah was exhausted but satisfied, falling into her bed each night with the kind of weariness that comes from honest work. Tom was kind but kept a professional distance, treating her with the same friendly respect he showed Mrs. Chen. He never made her uncomfortable, never looked at her inappropriately, never gave her any reason to regret accepting his offer. But sometimes, Hannah would catch him watching her when he thought she was not paying attention, a thoughtful expression on his face that she could not quite interpret. A week passed. Then 2. Hannah began to put on weight, her hollowed cheeks filling out, her arms growing stronger from the physical labor. Mrs. Chen praised her work ethic and began to trust her with more responsibilities. The ranch hands treated her like a little sister, protective but not patronizing. And slowly, so slowly she almost did not notice it happening, Hannah began to heal from the trauma of her father's death and the desperate weeks that followed. It was a month after her arrival that things began to shift between her and Tom. She was in the garden one afternoon, harvesting vegetables for dinner, when Tom rode up on his horse. He dismounted and walked over to where she knelt among the tomato plants, his shadow falling across her work. "Good crop this year," he commented. "Mrs. Chen has a gift for growing things." "She does," Hannah agreed, placing another ripe tomato in her basket. "She has been teaching me. I never had space for a proper garden before." Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, "I wanted to ask you something. Tomorrow is Sunday, and I usually ride into town for church services. Would you like to come along? I know you have not left the ranch since you arrived." Hannah sat back on her heels, surprised. "Oh, I had not really thought about it. I suppose I have been so busy settling in that I forgot what day it was." "No pressure if you would rather stay here," Tom added quickly. "But I thought you might enjoy getting out for a bit. We could stop at the general store after, pick up any personal items you might need." The offer was thoughtful and practical, and Hannah found herself nodding. "I would like that." "Thank you." Tom's smile was quick and genuine. "Good. We will leave at 8. Morning service starts at 9. The next morning, Hannah put on her best dress, which was not saying much since she only owned 2, but she had washed and pressed it carefully, and Mrs. Chen helped her pin up her long brown hair in a style that was both neat and flattering. When she emerged from the cabin, Tom was waiting by the wagon, and the look on his face when he saw her made her heart skip strangely in her chest. "You look nice," he said simply, then seemed to catch himself. Ready to go. The ride into Westcliff was pleasant, the morning air cool and fresh. Tom told her stories about the ranch, about the first winter when he nearly lost everything to a freak blizzard, about the time a mountain lion stalked the cattle, and he had to sit up 3 nights in a row to drive it away, about the year the creek flooded and changed its course, creating a new watering hole that the cattle preferred to the old one. "You love it here," Hannah observed. "The ranch, this valley, all of it." "I do," Tom admitted. "It is the first place that ever felt like mine, you know, not my father's place or my employer's place, but mine. I built something here with my own hands, and that means everything to me." "I think that is wonderful," Hannah said softly. "My father never had that. He worked in mines owned by other men his whole life. I think he would have loved to have his own piece of land." Tom glanced at her. "You miss him." "Every day, but it is getting easier being at the ranch. Having work to do and people around me. It helps." "Good. I am glad." The church in Westcliff was a small white building with a steeple that could be seen from anywhere in town. It was already filling up when they arrived, families and single folks gathering for Sunday worship. Tom helped Hannah down from the wagon, and she was immediately aware of the curious glances directed their way. A few people nodded greetings to Tom, and their eyes lingered on Hannah with obvious interest. Inside, Tom led her to a pew about halfway back. She recognized a few faces from her time in town before, but most people were strangers. The service was simple and sincere, led by a young preacher who spoke about kindness and community. Hannah found herself paying more attention than she had in months, the words resonating in a way they had not when she was desperate and hungry. After the service, several people approached Tom to chat, and he introduced Hannah each time as his new housekeeper. Most people were polite, if reserved. But one woman, elegant in a green silk dress with blonde hair perfectly coiffed, gave Hannah a look that was distinctly cold. "Thomas, how nice to see you," the woman said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "It has been ages since you came to dinner at our house. Father was just saying the other day that he needs to speak with you about purchasing some of your cattle." "Miss Harriet," Tom replied, his tone polite but notably cooler than when he spoke to others. "Please tell your father to stop by the ranch whenever it suits him. We can discuss business then." Harriet's eyes flicked to Hannah, dismissing her in an instant. "And who is this, Miss Hannah Armstrong? She works at the ranch." Tom's hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to Hannah's elbow, a subtle protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. "How quaint," Harriet said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Well, I hope to see you soon, Thomas. Do not be a stranger." She walked away in a rustle of expensive fabric. "Who was that?" Hannah asked quietly. Tom sighed. "Harriet Caldwell. Her father owns the biggest ranch in the valley and has been trying to pressure me into selling my land to him for years. Harriet has been equally persistent in trying to convince me to marry her." "Oh." Hannah felt a strange, twisting sensation in her stomach that she refused to acknowledge as jealousy. "She is very beautiful." "She is very spoiled and very mercenary," Tom corrected. "Her father told her to charm me into marriage so he could absorb my ranch into his holdings. I have made it clear I am not interested, but she does not seem to understand the word no." They left the church and walked to the general store, where Tom insisted on buying Hannah several items she had mentioned needing: a hairbrush, some fabric for a new dress, proper work boots, and a warm shawl for the coming winter. She protested the expense, but he waved off her concerns. "You work hard and you earn your wages," he said. "Besides, you need these things. Consider it an advance on your salary if it makes you feel better." On the ride back to the ranch, Hannah found herself thinking about what Mrs. Chen had warned her about on her first day. Do not go getting ideas. But it was getting harder not to notice how she felt when Tom smiled at her, how her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched, how she looked forward to dinner each night just to see him at the head of the table. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. He had saved her from destitution and given her a home. Of course, she felt warmly toward him. But deep down, she knew it was becoming something more than that. Tom seemed to be having similar struggles. He found himself looking for excuses to talk to Hannah, to be near her, to see her smile. He noticed things about her that he had no business noticing. The way she hummed while she worked, the graceful movement of her hands when she kneaded bread, the sound of her laugh when Danny said something funny at dinner. He told himself he was just being a good employer, making sure she was settling in well, but he knew he was lying to himself. It all came to a head one evening about 6 weeks after Hannah's arrival. A late summer storm rolled through the valley, bringing heavy rain and lightning that lit up the sky. Dinner had been cleared, and everyone had retired to their respective quarters to wait out the weather. Tom was in his study, trying to focus on his account books when he heard a knock at the front door. He opened it to find Hannah standing there, soaked to the skin despite the short distance between the cabin and the main house. "Hannah, what is wrong? Is Mrs. Chen all right?" "She is fine," Hannah said, her teeth chattering slightly. There is a leak in my room right over the bed. It is getting everything wet and I did not know what to do." Tom immediately grabbed his coat. "Show me." They ran through the rain to the cabin, and sure enough, water was dripping steadily from the ceiling onto Hannah's bed, soaking the quilts and pooling on the floor. Tom examined the leak, his jaw tight. "The roof must have a weak spot I did not know about," he said. "I can patch it, but not tonight in this storm. We need to get your things dried out and find you somewhere else to sleep." "I can sleep in the common room here on the sofa," Hannah suggested. "That old thing, you would wake up with a crooked back." Tom shook his head. "No, you will take the guest room in the main house. It is empty and dry." "Tom, I cannot." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Come on. Grab whatever is not soaked and let us get you moved before you catch your death of cold." 20 minutes later, Hannah found herself in a comfortable bedroom on the second floor of the main house, her few dry belongings placed carefully on a chair, a fire crackling in the small fireplace to take away the chill. Tom had provided her with a dry nightgown that had belonged to his mother, and he stood in the doorway looking slightly awkward. "There are extra blankets in that chest if you need them," he said. "And the washroom is just down the hall. If you need anything else—" "Tom," Hannah interrupted softly. "Thank you for everything. For today, for the last 6 weeks, for that day in town when you could have just walked past me. Thank you." Tom looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them. The storm rumbled outside, rain lashing against the windows. But inside this room there was only warmth and the sound of their breathing and a tension that neither of them knew how to name. "Hannah," Tom said quietly, taking a step into the room. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I have been trying not to say this, trying to be professional, to remember that you work for me and that I have no right to feel this way, but I cannot keep pretending anymore." He took a deep breath. "You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. I look for excuses to see you during the day. I find myself smiling at nothing just because I remember something you said. And I know I should not feel this way. I know there is a power imbalance and I am your employer and you might feel obligated." "Tom," Hannah interrupted, her voice shaking. "Stop talking." He stopped, looking stricken, clearly thinking she was about to reject him. Instead, she closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and kissed him. For a moment, Tom was frozen in shock. Then his arms came up around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with all the pent-up longing of the past 6 weeks. Hannah felt like she was drowning and being saved at the same time, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. The kiss was everything she had not let herself dream about, passionate and tender and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I saw you in the bakery. I have wanted you to do that since you gave me back my locket," Hannah confessed. Tom laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. Then he sobered slightly, pulling back enough to look into her eyes. "Hannah, I want to do this right. I want to court you properly with your permission. I want to take you to church socials and dances and show the whole town that you are important to me. I want to give you time to be sure this is what you want, because once I start courting you, once I let myself love you openly, I am not going to be able to stop." "I am already sure," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I love you, Tom. I think I started falling for you the moment you refused to let me suffer alone." His smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. "Then, I am the luckiest man in Colorado." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent, and Hannah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home after a long and painful journey. Tom wiped them away gently with his thumbs, his touch infinitely tender. "You should get some rest," he said reluctantly. "And I should go before Mrs. Chen finds me in your bedroom and takes a broom to my head, employer or not." Hannah laughed through her tears. She would too. She absolutely would, Tom agreed. "Good night, Hannah, sweet dreams." "Good night, Tom." After he left, Hannah changed into the borrowed nightgown and climbed into the comfortable bed, hardly able to believe what had just happened. She was in love with Thomas Vaughn, and miraculously, impossibly, he loved her back. The orphaned daughter of a dead miner and the owner of a cattle ranch. It should not work, but somehow it did. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, the sound of rain on the roof like a lullaby. The next morning, Tom was true to his word. At breakfast, with all the ranch hands and Mrs. Chen present, he announced that he was officially courting Hannah. Miguel and Jack offered their congratulations with knowing smiles that suggested they had seen this coming from a mile away. Danny blushed and stammered something about how nice that was. And Mrs. Chen fixed Tom with a stern look and said, "You hurt that girl, and I do not care how much you pay me. I will make your life miserable." "I would expect nothing less," Tom replied seriously, then grinned. True to his word, Tom courted Hannah with old-fashioned propriety. He took her to church every Sunday and introduced her to everyone as the woman he was courting. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He taught her to ride a horse properly so they could go on chaperoned picnics with Mrs. Chen trailing behind like a hawk-eyed guardian. He held her hand when they walked and stole kisses when he thought no one was looking, though Mrs. Chen always seemed to know and would clear her throat loudly in warning. Harriet Caldwell was not pleased by these developments. She made snide comments whenever she saw Hannah in town, loud enough to be overheard but quiet enough to maintain deniability. Hannah tried to ignore her, but it stung to hear herself described as a gold digger, an opportunist, a poor girl who had tricked a good man into caring for her. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months into Tom and Hannah's courtship, Harriet cornered Hannah at the general store. "You do realize he will never marry you," Harriet said sweetly, examining a bolt of fabric with feigned disinterest. "Men like Thomas Vaughn do not marry their servants. They might dally with them, but in the end, they marry women of their own class." Hannah felt her temper flare but kept her voice steady. "Tom is not like that, and I am not afraid of gossip from someone who has nothing better to do than spread cruelty." Harriet's eyes flashed. "Cruelty? I am trying to save you from heartbreak. You think you are special, but you are just a temporary amusement. When he tires of you, you will find yourself back on the street with nothing." "That is enough," a male voice said firmly. Both women turned to find Tom standing in the doorway of the shop, his expression thunderous. He crossed to Hannah and took her hand, pulling her close to his side. "Miss Caldwell, I am going to say this one time, and I expect you to listen carefully," Tom said, his voice cold. "Hannah is the woman I love and intend to marry. If I hear one more cruel word from you about her, I will make sure every rancher in this valley knows exactly what kind of person you are. Your father may have money and influence, but I have friends and respect, and people will believe me over you. Do I make myself clear?" Harriet's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she grabbed her reticule and stormed out of the shop without another word. Hannah turned to Tom, her eyes wide. "You said you intend to marry me." Tom's anger melted into chagrin. "That was not how I wanted you to find out. I had a whole plan. I was going to take you up to the ridge where you can see the whole valley and ask you properly." "Ask me now," Hannah said, her heart hammering. "Here, in the middle of the general store. I do not care where we are. Ask me." Tom looked around at the shopkeeper and the two other customers who were very obviously eavesdropping, then shrugged and dropped to one knee right there on the wooden floor. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Hannah realized he had been carrying it around, waiting for the perfect moment. "Hannah Armstrong, you came into my life when I did not even know I was lonely. You made my house into a home and taught me what it means to love someone so completely that their happiness matters more than my own. I know I am not fancy or educated or anything special, but I promise to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. Will you marry me?" Hannah was crying, big messy tears that she did not even try to stop. "Yes. Yes, of course yes." Tom stood and slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small ruby that must have cost him a significant portion of his savings. Then he kissed her right there in front of everyone, and the shopkeeper and customers broke into spontaneous applause. The wedding was planned for early December, giving Hannah time to sew a proper dress with help from Mrs. Chen and a seamstress in town. Tom wanted to marry sooner, but Hannah insisted on doing things properly, on having a real wedding that her parents would have been proud of. They settled on December 5th, a date that gave them 3 months to prepare. Those 3 months passed in a blur of happy chaos. The ranch hands built additional furniture for the main house, anticipating Hannah moving from the cabin into Tom's home as his wife. Mrs. Chen taught Hannah more advanced cooking techniques and shared Chinese recipes that had been passed down through her family. Tom took Hannah to Trinidad to meet distant cousins who were his only surviving family, and they welcomed her with open arms. Harriet Caldwell and her father made one last attempt to cause trouble, spreading rumors that Tom was being reckless with his finances and would bankrupt his ranch to keep his new wife in luxury. The rumors gained no traction because everyone who knew Tom knew that he was one of the most prudent, hard-working ranchers in the valley. Eventually, the Caldwells gave up and turned their attention to pressuring other ranchers, leaving Tom and Hannah in peace. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the first snow of winter dusting the mountains in white. The church was packed with friends and neighbors, all of whom had come to appreciate Hannah in the months since her arrival. She walked down the aisle alone, with no father to give her away, but she did not feel alone. She felt her parents with her in spirit, felt their approval and love as she moved toward Tom, who stood at the altar looking at her like she was the only person in the world. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows written by the preacher, promised to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, and sealed those promises with a kiss that made Mrs. Chen dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. Afterward, there was a reception at the town hall with food, dancing, and celebration that lasted well into the evening. When Tom finally brought his bride home to the ranch, carrying her over the threshold of the main house amid much laughter and cheering from the ranch hands, Hannah felt a sense of completion she had never thought possible. Less than 6 months ago, she had been starving and alone, trading her last possession for bread, convinced her life was over. Now she was married to a good man, surrounded by friends with a home and a future that stretched before her bright with promise. "Happy, Mrs. Vaughn?" Tom asked, setting her down gently in the middle of their bedroom. "Happier than I knew how to dream," Hannah replied honestly. Tom cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, his eyes full of love. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Their first months of marriage were a period of adjustment and discovery. Hannah moved her few possessions into the main house and learned to navigate the strange intimacy of sharing a home with Tom not as his employee but as his wife. There were awkward moments and fumbling attempts to figure out new routines, but there was also laughter and tenderness, and a growing sense of partnership that strengthened daily. Mrs. Chen continued to run the kitchen with Hannah's help, though the older woman had begun talking about eventually retiring and leaving the cooking entirely in Hannah's capable hands. The ranch hands treated Hannah with the same friendly respect they always had, though now they called her Mrs. Vaughn and came to her when they had concerns about the household rather than going directly to Tom. Winter settled over the valley, bringing snow and cold that kept everyone close to home. Tom taught Hannah to read his account books and explained the business side of ranching, wanting her to understand their finances and be able to manage things if anything ever happened to him. Hannah shared stories about her childhood, about her mother's gentle kindness and her father's rough humor, keeping their memories alive through words. Spring came late that year, the snow holding on stubbornly until well into April. But when it finally melted, the valley exploded into green life, wildflowers carpeting the meadows and new calves appearing in the herd. Tom and his hands worked from dawn to dusk during calving season, and Hannah hardly saw her husband except at meals. But every night, no matter how tired he was, Tom would hold her close and tell her he loved her, and that was enough. It was early summer when Hannah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noticing changes in her body, in her energy levels, in the way certain smells made her queasy. But she waited until she was sure, until there was no doubt, before telling Tom. She planned it carefully, waiting for a rare evening when the work was light and Tom was relaxed, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Tom," she said, settling into the chair next to his, "I have some news." He looked at her, immediately alert to something in her tone. "What is it?" "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. In fact, everything is very right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby in about 6 months if my calculations are correct." Tom stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and then pure, incandescent joy. "A baby? Hannah, are you sure?" "I am sure." He let out a whoop of happiness so loud it startled the horses in the corral, then pulled her into his arms and spun her around. "We are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father. Please stop spinning me before I get sick," Hannah said, laughing. Tom set her down carefully, immediately solicitous. "Are you all right? Should you be sitting down? Do you need water, food? Should we get the doctor?" "Tom, I am pregnant, not dying," Hannah said gently. "I am fine. But yes, we should probably have the doctor come out in a few weeks to check that everything is progressing normally." The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. Mrs. Chen clucked over Hannah like a mother hen, insisting she rest more and eat constantly. Miguel, Jack, and Danny were all delighted, already making plans to teach the baby to ride and rope as soon as it was old enough. Tom was simultaneously thrilled and terrified. Reading every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could get his hands on and driving Hannah slightly crazy with his overprotectiveness. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Hannah was sick for the first few months and exhausted for most of the rest. Tom was endlessly patient, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair when she was ill, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to keep her eyes open. As her belly grew, he would talk to it, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the mountains and how much they were already loved. Winter came again, and with it, Hannah's due date. The doctor had examined her in November and pronounced everything healthy and normal, predicting a birth sometime in mid-December. Tom arranged for the doctor to stay at a nearby hotel for 2 weeks around the due date, not wanting to risk being unable to reach him when Hannah went into labor. The baby, however, had other plans. On December 3rd, 2 years to the day before Hannah and Tom would celebrate their second wedding anniversary, Hannah's water broke while she was helping Mrs. Chen prepare dinner. Tom was out checking the herd but came running when Danny rode out to fetch him. By the time he burst into the house, wild-eyed and panicked, Mrs. Chen had already sent someone to fetch the doctor and had settled Hannah in the bedroom with cool cloths and calm instructions. The labor lasted 14 hours, long and difficult, and Tom paced the sitting room like a caged animal, refusing to leave despite Miguel's suggestions that he might want to go for a walk or check on the horses, or do anything other than wear a hole in the floor. Finally, just after dawn on December 4th, the sound of a baby's cry echoed through the house, and Tom nearly broke down the bedroom door in his haste to get to his wife. Hannah lay exhausted in the bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling. In her arms, wrapped in a soft white blanket, was a tiny red-faced baby with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Tom," Hannah said softly, "come meet your son." Tom approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the tiny human in his wife's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was blinking up at him with dark blue eyes, and Tom felt his heart crack open with more love than he thought possible to contain. "Our son," he whispered. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their child's face, Tom knew immediately. "Samuel, after your father." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel Thomas Vaughn, it is perfect." Tom carefully took his son in his arms, marveling at how light he was, how perfect and fragile and utterly dependent. "Hello, Samuel. I am your father, and I promise to protect you and love you and teach you to be a good man. You are so wanted, little one, so very wanted." The first months with a new baby were exhausting and overwhelming, filled with sleepless nights and constant worry. But they were also filled with wonder, with the miracle of watching Samuel grow and change day by day. He had Tom's blue eyes and Hannah's nose, and he was a remarkably calm baby, rarely crying except when hungry or uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen doted on him shamelessly, and the ranch hands took turns carving toys for him. Miguel made a small wooden rattle. Jack carved a horse to match the one Tom's father had made for Sarah years ago, and Danny spent weeks constructing a cradle so fine it looked like something from a furniture catalog. Hannah discovered a fierce, protective love for her son that sometimes scared her with its intensity. She would watch him sleep and feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of keeping this tiny person safe, of raising him to be good and kind in a world that was often neither. Tom seemed to understand, and on nights when she was particularly anxious, he would hold both her and Samuel and remind her that they were in this together, that she did not have to carry the weight alone. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler who was fearless and constantly getting into trouble. He loved the horses and the ranch hands and especially loved following his father around, trying to imitate everything Tom did. By the time he was 3, he had his own small pony and could ride better than some grown men. When Samuel was 4, Hannah became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Rose, was born on a warm day in June, and she was as different from her brother as possible. Where Samuel had been calm, Caroline was fussy. Where Samuel had been fearless, Caroline was cautious. But she had Tom's smile and Hannah's determination, and her family adored her. The years flowed past like water, each season bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered under Tom's careful management, growing slowly but steadily. Samuel showed early signs of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps, learning about cattle and horses and land management almost before he could read. Caroline was quieter, more studious, with a love of books and stories that reminded Hannah of herself at that age. When Samuel was 10 and Caroline was 6, Mrs. Chen finally decided to retire. She was in her 70s now, and the work had become too much. She moved to Trinidad to live with her niece but visited often, always bringing treats for the children and gossip from town. Hannah took over the kitchen entirely, aided by a young woman named Beth, who came from town 3 days a week to help with the heavier work. Tom's hair began to show gray at the temples, and Hannah found smile lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they were happy lines, earned through years of laughter and love. Their life was not without hardship. There were years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There was the spring when a late freeze killed half the calves. There was the year Samuel broke his arm falling from a horse and scared them all half to death. But through it all, they had each other. Tom still looked at Hannah like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Hannah still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. They still held hands when they walked and stole kisses when the children were not looking. The passion of their early days had mellowed into something deeper and more enduring, a love that was woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. When Samuel was 16, he began courting a girl from town, the daughter of the blacksmith, and Tom had to smile at how similar his son's shy, earnest approach was to his own courtship of Hannah years before. When Caroline was 12, she announced that she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, and Hannah bought her every book she could find to encourage that dream. The ranch hands changed over the years. Miguel retired and moved back to Trinidad to be with his family. Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had loved. Danny stayed on, eventually becoming Tom's foreman, and he married a girl from Westcliff and brought her to live in the small house they built on the far edge of the ranch property. New hands came and went, but the heart of the ranch remained the same. It was a place of hard work and honest dealing, where people were valued for their character rather than their circumstances, where a man's word was his bond and family meant more than blood. One evening, when Tom was 49 and Hannah was 44, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Samuel was off in town with his intended, making plans for their wedding in the fall. Caroline was inside reading by lamplight, lost in some adventure story. The ranch was quiet, the work done for the day, and the air was sweet with the smell of sage and pine. "You ever think about that day?" Tom asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "The day we met." Hannah knew exactly what day he meant. All the time. "Sometimes I cannot believe how different my life could have been if you had walked past that bakery 5 minutes earlier or later, if you had not looked through the window at just the right moment." "I do not think it was chance," Tom said quietly. "I think we were meant to find each other. You needed saving, and I needed someone to save. We needed each other." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me back more than just my locket that day. You gave me back my life, my hope, my future. Everything I have, everything I am, is because you decided to be kind to a desperate stranger." "You would have found your way without me," Tom said. "You are too strong, too stubborn to have stayed down for long. Maybe. But I am glad I did not have to find out." She lifted her head to look at him. "I love you, Thomas Vaughn. After all these years, after everything we have been through, I love you more now than I did the day we married." Tom kissed her softly, tenderly, the kind of kiss that came from years of knowing someone completely, of loving them with all their flaws and strengths. "And I love you, Hannah Vaughn. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Caroline called out that dinner was ready, and they could hear her moving around the kitchen. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and the horses nickered in response. The ranch settled into its nightly rhythm, familiar and comforting. This was their life, built from nothing but kindness and hard work and love. This was their legacy, not just the land and the cattle and the house, but the family they had created, the values they had instilled, the simple truth that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone who needs it, with no expectation of return. Samuel's wedding took place in October, a beautiful ceremony that united him with Margaret, the blacksmith's daughter who had captured his heart. The whole town turned out for the celebration, and there was dancing and feasting that lasted until well after midnight. Tom gave his son a portion of the ranch land as a wedding gift, enough to start his own small operation, and Samuel and Margaret built a house just over the ridge, close enough to visit but far enough to have their own space. Caroline continued her studies, determined to realize her dream of becoming a teacher. When she was 18, she left for Denver to attend a new teacher training program, and though Hannah cried to see her daughter leave, she was proud beyond words. Caroline wrote long letters home every week, full of details about her classes and her new friends and her dreams for the future. Tom and Hannah found themselves alone in the main house for the first time in nearly 2 decades, their children grown and gone. It was strange at first, the quiet that had once seemed so peaceful now feeling almost too empty. But they adjusted, enjoying the freedom to focus on each other again, to rediscover the partnership that had been the foundation of everything else. When Samuel and Margaret had their first child, a boy they named Thomas after his grandfather, Tom wept openly, holding his grandson and marveling at the continuation of his family, his legacy. Hannah watched her husband with their grandchild and felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the life they had built together. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its share of joys and sorrows. Caroline came home from Denver with a degree and a husband, a kind young man named Peter who taught mathematics. They settled in Westcliff, where Caroline took a position at the town school and quickly became beloved by her students. She and Peter had 3 children in quick succession, 2 girls and a boy, and the main house at the ranch was frequently filled with the sound of grandchildren playing. Samuel and Margaret had 4 more children after young Thomas, and their portion of the ranch grew into a thriving operation of its own. Samuel proved to be as capable and hardworking as his father, and Tom took deep satisfaction in knowing the ranch would continue after he was gone, that the land he had worked so hard to build would remain in the family. When Tom was 65, he finally began to slow down, letting Samuel and Danny take over more of the daily ranch operations. He still rode out most days to check on things, but he no longer worked from dawn to dusk, finally allowing himself time to simply enjoy the life he had created. He taught his grandchildren to ride and rope, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. He sat on the porch with Hannah in the evenings, talking about the past and the future and everything in between. Hannah's hair had turned completely gray by then, and Tom's was snow white, but they still held hands when they walked, still shared secret smiles across the dinner table, still loved each other with the same devotion that had brought them together all those years ago. One spring morning, when the valley was painted in wildflowers and new life, Tom and Hannah took a ride up to the ridge that overlooked their ranch. It was the place Tom had always thought of as his favorite spot on earth, where you could see the entire spread of the valley and the mountains beyond. They had ridden up here together countless times over the years, and it never failed to take their breath away. "Look at all of it," Tom said, gesturing at the view. "Everything we built, the house, the herds, the family. It is more than I ever dreamed possible when I bought this land as a young man." "You did this," Hannah said softly. "Your vision, your work ethic, your integrity, you made something lasting and good." Tom shook his head. "We did this, together. I could never have built this life without you, Hannah. You are the reason for all of it." They sat on their horses side by side, looking out at their kingdom, and Hannah thought about that frightened, desperate girl who had traded her only possession for bread. She thought about the cowboy who had given it back and said, "Keep it all." She thought about how that single act of kindness had changed the course of her entire life, had led to this moment, this view, this overwhelming sense of completion and joy. "If you could go back," Tom asked, as if reading her thoughts, "and tell that girl in the bakery what her life would become, do you think she would believe you?" Hannah smiled. Not for a second. She could never have imagined any of this. The love, the family, the home, the security. It would have seemed like an impossible fairy tale. "Good thing we did not have to imagine it," Tom said, reaching over to take her hand. "We got to live it instead." They rode back down to the ranch as the sun climbed higher in the sky, still holding hands across the space between their horses, still as in love as they had been on that long-ago day when a desperate young woman and a kind-hearted cowboy had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Tom lived to be 73 years old, and when he passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, Hannah was lying beside him, holding his hand just as she had held it on so many evenings before. She grieved deeply for the man who had been her partner, her love, her best friend for over 5 decades, but she did not regret a single moment of their time together. She remained at the ranch, cared for by Samuel and his family, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren who all knew the story of how their grandmother had once traded her only possession for bread, and how their grandfather had given it back and said, "Keep it all." It became family legend, the foundation story of the Vaughn family, a reminder that kindness matters, that one act of compassion can ripple out across generations, that love can grow from the smallest seeds into something that endures beyond a single lifetime. Hannah lived to be 87 years old, her mind sharp and her spirit strong until the very end. When she died on a beautiful spring morning, surrounded by family, she was wearing her mother's locket around her neck, the one Thomas Vaughn had bought back for her all those years ago. In her other hand, she clutched the small wooden horse Tom had carried in memory of his sister, the one he had shown her on their first night together in the restaurant in Westcliff. They buried her next to Tom on the hill overlooking the ranch, and at the funeral, Samuel told the story one more time of how his parents had met, how a single act of kindness had created a legacy that would last for generations. He spoke of love and family and the simple truth that we are all called to help each other, to see those who are suffering and offer them not just charity but dignity, not just assistance but hope. The ranch continued, passed down through the family, remaining a place of hard work and honest dealing, where people were valued for who they were rather than what they owned. The main house was expanded and updated over the years, but the original log structure remained at its core, a testament to what Tom and Hannah had built together. And in a place of honor in the living room, displayed in a glass case so that generations of Vaughns could see it, sat a silver locket engraved with delicate flowers, and a small wooden horse worn smooth from decades of handling. Below them, a placard told their story, the story of how she traded her only possession for bread. The cowboy gave it back and said, "Keep it all." And from that moment of grace and kindness, a love story for the ages had been born. Their great-great-grandchildren would grow up hearing that story, would learn from it the values that had sustained their family for over a century, would carry forward the legacy of compassion and love that Hannah and Tom had created in the wild valley of Colorado so many years before. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the mountains in gold, those descendants would swear they could feel their ancestors' presence, still watching over the land they loved, still holding hands after all these years, still together in whatever lay beyond this life. It was a love story that began with desperate hunger and answered kindness, and it ended only in the way all the best love stories do, with a legacy that would never truly end, with children and grandchildren carrying forward the best of what came before, with the knowledge that true love, once kindled, burns on forever in the hearts of those who follow. And in Westcliff, Colorado, where it all began, the old-timers still told the tale on winter evenings, of the starving girl and the cowboy with the blue eyes, of the locket and the bread and the moment when everything changed. They told it as truth and legend both, a story of their town, their valley, their shared history. They told it because it mattered. They told it because love stories like that one were rare and precious and deserved to be remembered. They told it because everyone needs to believe that kindness can save us, that love can heal us, and that sometimes, when we least expect it, a stranger's compassion can become the beginning of everything good and beautiful in our lives. The story of Hannah and Tom Vaughn became the story Westcliff told about itself, a reminder of what the best of the Old West could be when people chose kindness over cruelty, when they saw each other's humanity and responded with grace. It was a story of survival and redemption, of second chances and new beginnings, of a love that grew from a single moment of compassion into something that spanned a lifetime and beyond. And that, in the end, was the truest happy ending of all.